make sure somebody can take a photo of us doing a podcast.
Oh, I hope they will.
I can already see the development director taking photos, so we
Good.
We should be all right. Yeah, most seats are taken. There's still a few.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I see Kings Milband and
Nick Air.
Dave Jones.
Gosh. Who else is here? Give it one more minute, I think. You good to go? You have your notes?
Everything.
Okay. All right, let's start. Welcome, everybody. This is quite a special event. It's not been many times that we have had a conversation, a public event in the senior library, I believe, in the history of the college. So it's quite a special thing for the college. And we're very grateful for, I think, everybody who's been involved in setting this up. It's quite a bit of an undertaking. Today we're doing a live podcast recording, which might be the first time as well in history that this has happened at Oriel College, I don't know. And it's also live streamed, so there will be people online. You're very lucky to get seats. Within 2 hours, the event had sold out, even though there was no price tag. But all the tickets were gone within just about 2 hours. We have some free seats now. There might still be some latecomers. But it's really great to see so much interest. And just let me briefly say what we're going to do and then introduce the podcast and Laurent. So we have about 30, maybe 40 minutes for conversation. It will be recorded, and if the audio quality is of sufficient quality, it will also then be streamed through the main podcast platform. And then we have some time for more informal conversation that will not be as part of the podcast, and at which point we will have a roaming mic in the room. There will be drinks afterwards in the Champneys room. We will guide you to where that is. If you want to join us there, there's sort of wine and other things. And that's it. So that's the plan for the day. Let me now introduce Redefining Energy and Laurent Segalen. So Redefining Energy is actually one of the world's top 3 podcasts on energy, according to Google. So when you Google energy podcasts top in the world, I think Redefining Energy comes up at number 3. What are the top 3? And you had 650,000 downloads last year or something like that?
Yeah,
last year.
2.5.
It's a great podcast. I've listened to it for more than, I think it's now 8 years.
Yeah.
And Laurent is here, you may have noticed, alone. The other co-host, Gerard, Reid, is not able to come today. He has injured his leg, unfortunately, and can't travel here. So it's just the 2 of us, but we're going to have a good conversation, I'm sure. Let me just briefly introduce Laurent. Laurent is a former investment banker. You've worked in finance for something like 3 decades for organizations like Lehman Brothers, PwC, Nomura, and many others. And Laurent has traded, I think it was $1 billion worth of energy commodities over the course of his career, which is a huge number, of course. And you have set up several digital platforms for trading renewable electricity, battery integration, and things like that. But now you are a professional podcast co-host, and that's why we have you here today. And the final thing I wanted to say is this is not a usual podcast in the way that there's a guest, Laurent and Gerard would prepare some questions. We have sort of turned this on its head. It's a sort of unconference-inspired, unpodcast, if you will. So the questions that we're going to discuss are actually from all of you, from the audience. And we have a list here. We have so many. We can't go through the 50 or so questions we received. We had to select and cluster them, but you will have a chance later on, as I said, to ask your question if we haven't discussed it yet. We do our best to cover as much as we can, but we thought we'd try this as a new concept and see whether that works. At this point, Laurent, I think I hand it over to you, and you hopefully don't tell me that I have misrepresented you in my introduction or redefining energy, and I think you have prepared a little bit of an introduction, and you want to mention Aristotle, I think, as well. That's what I heard from you before.
Yeah.
So let's see how Aristotle features in this podcast.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks Jan for having me. You can hear from my voice that I had a very busy yesterday, so it's going to be quiet. The first thing I like to say is thank you all for being here. Thank you for the people who are listening to listen. And I'm thankful to you that you allocate your time, that you allocate a bit of your brain to listen to what I have to say. And it's, for me, it's a great honor. It's very humbling as well to be here. Now, as you noticed, so with Gerard, we did 300 to 400 episodes of the pod. And what a journey, because at the beginning, we were just two bankers getting drunk in a pub near Piccadilly and just saying, oh, we're so intelligent, we should record what we're saying, which we did, and the rest is history. Now, before we answer to those questions, there's a question you need every one of you to ask yourself, and it's a question I also ask myself. It's not really why are we here, but why are you here? How did you come to be interested in environment, energy, security, transition, technology? I mean, that whole umbrella. And this is where I'm going to use Aristotle, the famous triangle of Aristotle, ethos, logos, pathos. So ethos, okay, so you read the Paris Accord, you want to save the planet, you heard Greta Thunberg at Davos, you read Mark Carney, The Tragedy of the Horizon. Now it's going to be the tragedy of Alberta trying to secede, so basically we're going to give the oil industry everything they want. You had read Larry Fink in 2020, the head of BlackRock. Finance is now climate finance, everything is ESG, something he has now totally forgotten. But ethos is good because at the end of the day, that's how laws get passed. So maybe that's ethos, or maybe that's going to be logos. So logos, you're going to read your BNEF reports, Amber report. I see Dave and Kingsmill are here. Extraordinary data, you're going to run your models, your LCOEs. You're going to calculate your spark spread, and you're going to conclude that, yes, the environment is mathematically what needs to be done. And of course, the last one's the pathos, and that's who I am, and that's why I'm here. Because when I was 12, as I was doing a trip, a school trip in Germany, they brought us at the border of West and East Germany, and I saw a country divided in two. I saw kilometers of barbed wires, miradors, and the Russians, already the Russians, bullying or putting the whole country in jail. I was 13. When I got 15, there was the biggest oil spill ever on my beloved province of Brittany, where a ship called Amoco Cadiz, so now it's part of BP, run on ground 220,000 barrels of oil. It was the moment we had the oil crisis, so the government sided with the oil company. And we, Bretons, we went, shovel, bucket, and we clean ourselves our beaches. So my interaction with the environment is not the ethos or the logos, is being 15 on a beach in Brittany. And then the last one, as I was at PwC and we were preparing the carbon markets. That was in September 2001. I had some guys, very good friends, at the 140 level of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And we had a call that day, call which never happened. And I lost Carlton Bartels and Adam White. May their name be said so they are not forgotten. And this is where you realize, you know, that whole relationship with the Middle East, just because of oil, makes the whole world toxic. So you ask what are my deep levers for energy security against the Russian, against oil, my commitment to the environment. You know, these are the seminal moments. Now, I can go outside, you know, with a loudspeaker, but my friends at Friend of the Earth told me, you need to be inside the system to change it, because if you're outside shouting, you're going to feel good about it, but nothing's going to change. And how do you change? You change it through finance, you change it through investment, and you change to try to redirect whatever money is put into fossil fuels into better technology. Now it works most of the time, sometimes it doesn't, but it's okay. It's okay. You try and try again. So sorry for this long introduction, but I think it's going to be everybody has his own angle, his own past, his own, you know, cultural shift, and even the question you're going to ask now, which are very valid, will have different answers depending where you stand. You'll get a good answer in Oxford. You ask the same question in Houston, Texas, or in Beijing. You know, same, you know, and you will have always good valid answers. So ask your first question.
Well, yeah, the first question, it's difficult to pivot from your very personal story, Laurent, to what is a fairly abstract but super important issue. The first question is really around, are we actually in an energy transition? There were several questions that people raised. You know, some of you, I think, suggested, well, haven't we seen a bit of a backlash against transition recently? Other people have talked about an energy addition because we still see fossil fuels rising. So this is the first question we would like to discuss. I certainly have my views on this question and have worked with several people in the audience trying to get to an answer. But Laurent, do you want to kick us off on this question, and then I can offer my perspective as well, and then see where we end up before we move on to the next one?
Excellent. So when it's come to predicting the future, the first thing is to look back at the past prediction of the future which were made when it comes to energy. And if I'm in 2000 and I look at the best expert in 2000 of how they see the next 10 years, there are two words that they're not going to use is LED and shale gas, which means nobody saw coming, even 5 years before, the two most important energy events of the decade. If you're in 2010, what's going to happen? There's a beautiful McKinsey report from 2012, which I keep because people say it does not exist. It exists. I have it on my hard drive. The future of automotive. Okay, it's full of hydrogen, of course. The word electric is written once in that 2012 report. If you ask the people like me who are already investing in solar in 2010, where the price of the panel is going to be, it was at $4 a watt. Or we say, look, if we manage to get that 3, we'll be lucky. Puff, at the end of the decade, it's at 20 cents. Which means nobody saw that coming either. Okay? You do in 2020 the future, but you know what? Nobody talks about data centers. Nobody talks about batteries. Or they talk about batteries within cars. Nobody talks about energy. So just this to explain you, the future is very hard to predict, and technological stuff happen, which, you know, are, okay, maybe over 1 year or two, but they come extremely fast, and they tend to, you know, rebalance the cards. Now, in relation to your question, I'm going to make a Roman antiquity parallel. It's what I call the Diocletian tetrarchy. So in the Diocletian tetrarchy, you have the Augusti and the Caesaris. So you have the two main thinkers, which I'm sure everybody know here. On one hand, you've got Václav Smil, and on the other, you've got Clayton Christensen. You have the Pope of the system are very rigid and move very, very slowly. And on the other, you've got that wonderful man that we lost too soon, who is like, describe disruption, destruction, the Kodak moments, the S-curves. And of course, you go down one notch to the Caesaris. So in the Václav Smil column, you'll have Daniel Yergin, which for me, when I read the prize 38 years ago, was an absolute revelation, because you really understand, he rewrites the whole 20th century through the prism of oil. And all the geopolitics links to oil, and I can tell you, if you should read it, it's very eye-opening. And he's still alive, he's a very clever guy. He has not really updated his software for the past 15 years, but beside that, he's a very clever, very respected guy. And of the other, everybody knows him here, it's Michael Liebreich, who has taken the Christensen theory and put them to work on solar batteries, and Kingsmill is there, so it's kind of it's the same school of thought. And of course, depending which cocktail you're going to take of the Smil, Yergin, or the Christensen Liebreich, to answer to your question, the best way is you look back 15 years, because they've been saying kind of the same thing. Over time, I would say the Liebreich camp is 70% and the Yergin camp 30%, just by the fact. So if you ask me, are we addition or transition, we are two-thirds transition, one-third addition, and we have geographical growth on one hand and arithmetic on the others. Oil, 101 million barrels. Okay, we're going to go to 102, 103. That's not a growth sector.
Let me maybe go a bit deeper on this point, because I think when you look at it globally, it is true that fossil fuels have kept on rising and still keep on rising, and we add on renewables on top. But I was in Copenhagen just 2 days ago, and when you look at Denmark's transition, it's as a case study, just in the electricity sector, renewables are now something like close to 90% of electricity generation. EV sales are 70% or 80% now. So massive transformation. So once you start looking at the transition sectorally or regionally, the picture does change quite a bit. And we talked about this in preparation for this. Actually looking at things globally can be instructive, because it tells you something about how fast we're going globally, but it doesn't tell you about all the innovation that's taking place in different parts of the world. It doesn't tell you actually where the solutions are, where the problems are, and therefore I think it's a question that needs to be more nuanced. We are in a transition in some parts, in some sectors, in some countries, but we're not yet in a transition globally everywhere, and that's going to take some time. But these things tend to come in tranches, right? You may look at the deployment of other technologies that hasn't happened at the same speed everywhere, that has happened at different speeds and different times in different places. And I think that will be my take on this question. Are we going fast enough? Of course we're not. Otherwise emissions would have come down, and we wouldn't see an increase in demand for fossil fuels. But to say that we're not in a transition, it's just an addition, I think is too short-sighted. That will be my take on the question. And it also then it does not allow you to understand really where the barriers are and where the solutions are. What do you think about that, Laurent?
Well, first of all, it's very. If we talk electrification, in our countries, which is like we had flat electricity for 20 years. So the electrical system has lost the muscle memory of growing. They are in America trying to get it back, and it's very, very painful because you don't have enough electricians, because connection to the grid lasts 10 years, because you get your turbines in 6 years, because people have been, become kind of comfortable in a zero growth universe. The electrification, it's the future. Whether you talk about better technology, whether you talk about reducing emission, whether you talk about reducing fossil fuel, just give better product to people. So it's going to be EVs, but in India it's going to be cooling, and as here it's going to be heating. You like your heat pumps, and I love the heat pumps as well. And of course in America it's going to be data center. Yesterday I was talking to a guy from Google. I said, this AI stuff is not. He said, no, we don't build data center for AI. We build data centers because of YouTube, because of autonomous vehicle. Our Waymo are just, need more and more data centers. So 80% of the data centers we're building are not for AI, they're just for your run-of-the-mill cloud. And then he told me, we had this big meeting at Google to see how we could spend our $184 billion capex investment this year, 184. The first thing he said, that's more than the military budget of Russia. Just Google. And then, a guy said, yeah, our budget of 180, and the guy said, sorry, 184. For you, 4 billion is a rounding error. So, that gives you a bit of the magnitude of the amount of money that the hyperscalers are they going to make stupid things with them? 100%. They're going to be crisis, they're going to be bankruptcy, but the digitization effort that's happening in the US and that's going to come in shape or form in Europe, this is great news because we finally going to see growth, and a system with zero growth where it's like the same pizza, you want the bigger size of pizza, you need to take it from somebody else. A system is much better when it's growing.
We could discuss how useful AI is as a tool and whether that is good energy demand growth or not. But I think let's go into the next question, which is sort of connected. I think you mentioned the US already and the huge growth in data centers. The next cluster of questions really are around geopolitics and so industrial policy, the rise of China as a global superpower, and especially relevant, of course, in energy, the backlash against some of the clean energy policies in the US, and what And I have the feeling that we are on the cusp of quite an interesting switch globally when it comes to energy, where still people talk a lot about the US, but when you look at investment figures, right, all the time, Laurent, when you look at how much money gets invested in clean energy technologies, it's not the US that's top of the list, right? That's China. And what is your take on how is that shift affecting geopolitics when it comes to energy dependencies? You mentioned your sort of early youth experience with oil and dependency and realizing the implications of that. How is all of that going to change in the next 5 years or 10 years if you want to look ahead?
Yeah, look, it's the whole debate, petrostate versus electrostate. And here, Kingsmill, Amber, are the real brain behind that. And of course, it's all about industrial policy. Now, the first thing I want to say is the moment you do ideology in energy, it costs a lot. Ideology costs a fortune. GBE decides that to go to COP, they want to be zero coal. Okay, zero coal, regardless of the cost of the system, fine. So they're going to tell Drax, okay, wonderful, you're going to switch to biomass, you're going to cut trees, I'm sure everything's going to be sustainable. Of course, they're not. But at the end of the day, they give them 10 billion pounds over 10 years. 10 billion pounds just for the ideological purity of saying we don't burn coal anymore. The Germans, they're going to close 6 well-functioning nuclear plants just because it's ideology. And in the US, they are waging a war against offshore wind just for ideological reason. So every time you want to do ideology, good, but come with your checkbook. That's the first thing I'd like to say. What was your question again?
The change in geopolitics.
Yeah, okay, so some people say, the answer is we need to produce everything here. We need to have an autarkic, philosophy, building our solar panels, and because the Chinese are so awful, now please, you're going to take your iPhone and you're going to break your iPhones because 90% of them are done in China, which apparently cause zero problem. What I would say is you still need to have an industrial strategy, but you need to have a smart one. So you need to take that whole electrotech and figure out which one are commoditized and you don't really just buy it, and which part are really strategic and double down the investment. So don't do a kind of sprinkling, blanket, we're going to support all these things. Very, very targeted. So I've got, I put a list together here.
I mean, there's a fundamental difference, isn't there? If you have a renewables-based system, for example, you have to import the technology maybe from China, right, solar panels. Yes. But then once they're installed, you don't need to have a fuel in order to operate them. Whereas if you operate a gas-fired power station, you need to have a fuel to keep that running. So they're fundamentally different technologies in that way. So the dependency is quite a different one, isn't it?
Yeah, but look, every expert, and I trust the experts, will tell you, we'll go to 70, 80% of renewable penetration with the technology we have and kind of the system we have. You want to do ideology, you want to net zero it or zero it, it's going to cost an absolute fortune. So it makes economic sense for everybody's bill to keep probably the 20% of fossil fuel on the system. And that's a more intelligent debate than to say net zero is zero, and that's the end of it. Now, going back to the technologies, some of those technology, it's fine, let the Chinese build them. Solar panels, it's fine. Now, if you look at battery cells, there's been some joint venture. They're going to be built in Portugal, in Spain, in Poland. Once once those plants are there and people kind of know how to do some good LFP batteries, great. Then you can put some protective measures because we have built an industry. So first we build an industry, then we protect it. And then there are other things like HVDC cable, switch gears, power electronics, key material processing that needs to be, here at home. And others, okay, fine, we'll import it. They're cheap, and in fact, nobody's making money. I mean, look, if you're a shareholder of Longi or Ginko, you made zero money. So you need to be selective. There are things which are critical and we need to protect them and invest in them, and others that are useless. Please.
I mean, there's now a sort of initiative, at least in the European Union, to manufacture goods here, right? So I want to get into the resilience question, which came up quite a few of you asked that question. So if we move away from a more fossil-based economy to a more renewables-based economy, and using more electricity overall, what does it mean in terms of resilience, supply chain disruptions, but also grid resilience, and how extreme weather, cyber attacks, all of these things can have an impact on the energy system. And my take has always been that I feel electricity is fundamental to everything we do already. You can't get petrol from a petrol station if there's no electricity, because the pump that pumps the petrol wouldn't operate. You can't run your gas boiler if there's no electricity, because every modern heating system needs electricity. And therefore, to say that we will end up in a more vulnerable world if we electrify, I don't think it's necessarily true. There's a great book, actually. It's not a great book, but it's a useful book called Blackout, which is kind of depicting a scenario of what would happen over 1 day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, a month, if there was no electricity at all. And society, as we know it, would collapse. I mean, that's just a fact. Will that be dramatically different if we have a much higher electrified share of our energy system opposed to using combustible fossil fuels? I think that's an interesting question. And I don't pretend to have the answer to that, but maybe you do, Laurent. Maybe you've thought about this a bit more than I have.
I'm sure I have answers to everything. Not sure they're so. Everybody talks about the blackout in Spain last year, but in fact the remarkable story is how fast they managed to put the whole system back together in 12 hours, which looks long if you're stuck in an elevator, but they have managed to put back a whole system together in 15 hours or 12 hours. So look, I know the distribution, service operator, I know the transmission. They are on it 24/7. And every day they get better and they get more sensors and there are more decentralization. So really, I mean, they are on it. Government's on it. A 3-day blackout, a government's gone. So it's not very, when I do an episode on resilience, first I'm going to learn a lot. The second, I'm going to fall asleep. And the third is not going to have any downloads. So don't worry about that. But what I'm saying is, it's not sexy, but people are working a lot on it. Now, of course, if you're in Finland and you get attack and sabotage daily from the Russians, you're even more prepared. And of course, maybe the further down you go, you're a bit less lax. What has happened, in fact, in Spain is that gas was always there to balance the renewables, okay? And as renewables penetration, continued, the gas plant load factor fell down to 30%. They went to see the government, Iberdrola, said we need more money because we don't run our gas plants at all because we've been, solar and wind has eaten our lunch. And the government said, no, I'm not going to give you any money, I'm poor, blah, blah, blah. So the gas plant said, okay, fine. And so just because the government did not want to lean in the blackmail of the gas lobby on purpose said, okay, fine, you're on your own, any problem, it's on you. And after the blackout, what you see is that the load factors of gas, shot back up because the government got its lesson. Now, of course, they're going to develop batteries, but the fact that they refuse to develop battery, that's criminal. Because everybody, GB would do battery, now Italy, and they had a bureaucracy. I don't know what happened in Spain, but never figure out that battery was now a mature technology which could really alleviate any risk problem or resilience issue. So that's the one. And the second, and that's kind of...
Just to say, lithium-ion batteries were invented in Oxford. For those of you who don't know that, we actually had one of the Nobel laureates who was a part of that invention give his lecture here last year. So you could walk in 5 minutes to the department where that technology came about, and he's given a fascinating lecture about how that technology from the lab has grown to now gigawatt scale batteries. I don't actually know how many gigawatts are in the pipeline. I think the UK has, is it 7 gigawatts or something like that in the pipeline of getting deployed? But yeah, that was unthinkable just 10 years ago, the size of these grid-connected batteries. So I think it's a really key point. And you had a whole episode, I think, on batteries, or several episodes probably in the past.
Yeah, batteries is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And of course, the guy who broke the glass ceiling is not very popular. I mean, was the kind of the hero of the last decade and is the zero of this decade. It's Elon Musk. Now, you can think whatever you want about the person, and I can recognize it's pretty obnoxious, but it took his approach of being a bully, and he bullied Australia, who just came out, South Australia, who just came out from a blackout, and all the Australian experts say, oh, we're going to build more gas plants to provide resilience to the system. Say, no, I'll put your battery in 3 months and it's going to work. And if it doesn't, work, it's for free. So you need balls. It's not going to be ABB or your Hitachi or Siemens who's going to do that. And he delivered Hornsdale, and all of a sudden, okay, second thing, Hornsdale was paid in 18 months. Hey, hello. So all of a sudden, technology is there, start making money. Everybody just followed him. So, you need to give credit where credit is due. The second point is, that's time. Batteries is time. The second is space. So it's all about the HVDC line, which is an unsung hero. If you look at GB, every day we import and export 15% of our electricity. And we even have created in the North Sea, I would say the M25 of power. So it's always the same thing. It comes from France because there's too much nuclear, goes to GB. There's always a part which goes to Ireland because unless it's very windy, they don't have enough power there. And then it turns back to Denmark. And right now it turns back even to Norway, which contrary to people say there's so much hydro in Norway. Yeah, why do they import right now some power from GB, which is expensive because their hydro are low, which is another factor.
And that's a good thing, right? Because sometimes in the media discussion, people are very concerned because 2% or 3% of electricity consumption were imported more than the year before. When you look at other energy carriers, where the European Union imports about 58% of all its energy from other countries. The UK is slightly better because there's more domestic gas production. But when you look at those figures, they're much higher, and people get incredibly concerned about importing a relatively small amount of electricity. I wonder why that is, why we have this sort of, and this gets us into the sort of last cluster of questions around the politics, which I think are fascinating, because what I see, and I think you probably agree with me, Laurent, we have this divergence where there is a really polarized discussion taking place publicly in the media, on social media, and it feels like things are not really moving. There's a lot of disagreement. But when you look at the market and the technology space, things are moving quite fast, and not fast enough, perhaps, not everywhere, but there's been tremendous progress. Even in last year in the US, I think was another record year for renewable investment and battery investment in the US under the Trump administration. So how do we bring these two things together, sort of the politics, the conversation we have publicly around the transition and energy, and what actually happens on the ground?
It's very sad that clean energy has become entangled in culture wars. And it was captured by one camp, okay? But the other camp used the most absurd statement to ridicule it. So, what happened when the sun doesn't shine, those simple questions which requires very complex answers. Of course, nobody has time to really go into the mechanics of a system. And so it has become, when I read the Telegraph or just the headlines, because I don't even want to read the article, so the EV penetration goes there and then the click. And this is where you have the article of the Telegraph say.
It's usually January, right? In January when there's fewer cars being
fewer
sold.
cars. I want my diesel back, and then goes up, and then there's a blip, and that's the second article. Look, there's nothing you can do. If you don't like it, just put more money. At the end of the day, it's just money. You arrive with the Telegraph, and you give them £10 million, they will write whatever you want. Data center on the moon, anything you want, okay? It's just a question of money. You don't like it, ignore it, just, go on, invest. Because at the end of the day, it's not about what people talk about, it's about the investment you make. Hard. Walls, turbines, generators, the cables, batteries. That's what makes the transition happen. It's not like a noise you don't like because it has been entangled into culture war. And at some point, you want to question the government. Question why, as several governments of different political color gave £10 billion to Drax. Why? That's a real scandal. Why? Nuclear is out of control in terms of cost. out of control. It's an industry which I'm just going to milk the taxpayer, you know. Or when is it going to be finished? 2007, okay, fine. Sorry, 2012, or sorry, 2015, or sorry, I don't even know anymore. How much does it cost? I don't know, just give me more money. Oh, and now we found a new thing, the RAB, regulatory asset base. We, you know, like in the Matrix, you know, when you pump directly on the bodies, you know, 1st of January, your new nuclear plant, Sizewell C, is already in your bills. They have not put the first, you know, batch of concrete. You know, they're already, you know, you're already paying for it and explain you, but you know, the cost of capital is going to be lower, so this one is going to be 20% cheaper, which is weird because when they were building Inclesi 10 years ago, they say, don't worry, the next one will be 30% cheaper. Now, the way they communicate is very interesting because how much does it cost? They say, oh, it costs this amount. I don't know, they calculate. And then they say, it's in 212 pounds. But you know, you're in 225. So in fact, you know, with inflation, it's already 30% more. So they're very good at muddying the water. Now, we can have debate nonstop. I think we should have, you know, some nuclear power. I think it's important, but the industry is not disciplined. The real discipline would be, okay, you take the top 10 nuclear experts, okay, you'll sign on this, okay, I give you 20% more time, 20% more budget because you never know what's going to happen. If you go over, your house is gone, your mortgage is gone, your pension is gone, okay? But if you reach on time, you'll get 10 million pounds each, tax-free. Do you sign? And you know what they're going to say? Well, no, we need to recalculate. So other people's money, that's wonderful. And unfortunately, that's the nuclear industry. I don't want to do it Chinese style where, you know, if the stuff is not on time on budget, you might be sent to, you know, Westworld in a re-education camp. But it's great energy, but an industry which is undisciplined.
You just managed to tick off another question cluster around nuclear. I suggest we maybe now go to our audience with a roaming mic and you know, get other questions in. We have another 15 minutes or so, and then we have our drinks. I mean, we've been sort of you know, really racing through the different. There's many more questions we didn't even get to, but I would love to hear from people in the audience and see whether there's any questions. There is a microphone, I believe, that hopefully will be coming in the next few seconds, and we just wait for that to show up, and if it doesn't, we have to do it without the microphone, I suggest. Let's see whether it's somewhere to be found.